You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 13.
On the other side of the landslide, the driver of the large bus carrying Mohawk, Mane and Flat Top switched off the ignition and began fending off questions from some of the passengers sitting at the front about when the bus would get underway again. "Clearly we are stuck here and cannot move until the rest of the cars do," he explained patiently. This answer satisfied only some of the paying customers. Flat Top understood nothing of the conversations going on around him in the Nepalese language, but it was obvious that the bus was not going anywhere soon. Nudging Mane awake, he said, "Looks like we might have a problem." Mane rubbed his eyes, looked through the windows on all four sides of the bus and noted the buildup of unmoving traffic ahead. It looked dark outside, very dark. He tried not to think about it. "I wonder how close we are to Shabrubesi," he said. "Maybe close enough to hike the rest of the way," grunted Flat Top. "Be worth a look up ahead to see what's going on." He gave Mohawk's sleeping face a rough pat with an open palm that was almost as big as a dinner plate. "Rise and shine," he said. "We're going to hike up ahead to check out the situation. Take your pack with you, just in case we decide to ditch the bus." Mohawk pulled the MP3 earphones from his ears and yawned sleepily. After stowing the prized possessions safely in his rucksack, he tightened up the laces on his boots, then stood up and followed his brothers down the aisle of the bus. He was so tall that his vertical silver grill of hair was pressed flat against the ceiling. At first, the bus driver refused to open the door, but he relented when Flat Top started to crack the knuckles of his huge fist menacingly. Shouldering their rucksacks, the three GXs stepped out into the night and glanced around, getting their bearings. Mane immediately flicked on his torch and shone it around the dark mountain road. The prospect of a long walk through this inky blackness made him feel queasy, but he knew Flat Top would never agree to sitting around on the bus until morning. He just hoped he had enough torch batteries in his rucksack to make it all the way to Shabrubesi. Mohawk brushed the dust off his trousers and ran his fingers through his hair to remove the cobwebs he had collected from the bus's ceiling. They started walking up the road and soon left the bus behind them. Their cover story while in Nepal was that they were South Korean university students, but there was no hiding the fact that they were army-trained through and through, because as they hiked up the mountain road, they unconsciously fell into single file and their feet moved in perfect unison. They looked like they were at a military parade. The only thing missing was a marching band. At one point they passed by a little white car that was empty of occupants. Mane paused, shone his torch through the windows, then continued on. "They must have the same idea as us," he said. A few minutes later the landslide came into view and Flat Top gave a low whistle. "Geez, nobody's getting past that in a hurry," he said. "Looks like this is the end of our bus ride." Mane ran his eyes across the expanse of mud and debris that had obliterated the mountain road. Parts were clearly illuminated by the headlights of nearby cars, and as he moved closer, he saw the twisted tangle of trees and rocks jutting from the edges of the landslide. The cleanup, whenever it happened, would take a long time. "Think we can climb it?" he asked. This suggestion was contrary to Mohawk's life philosophy. "Wait a minute," he said nervously. "Who said anything about climbing it? I thought we were just here to look at it." "Well, there's no point going back to the bus, so that leaves only one other option," replied Mane. "Right, wait for the earth-moving equipment to arrive and clean this mess up," Mohawk said. Flat Top snorted in disgust. "Don't be stupid," he growled. "That might take weeks. Besides, I reckon we can climb that easily." He sized up the obstacle and added, "And with a bit of luck there'll be some vehicles stuck on the other side, and we'll be able to hitch a ride to Shabrubesi." He started ahead and in a few moments had clambered several meters up the side of the landslide, beyond the illumination from the car's headlights. He grunted from the exertion of the climb and wasn't at all afraid of what he was doing. The only thing he feared was small places like broom closets, and blessedly there weren't any of those around here. Flat Top breathed deeply of the cool night air and grinned as he worked his way upwards. His hands and feet moved with unconscious coordination, searching out handholds and footholds among the boulders and tree trunks projecting from the mud. It was a challenging climb, but the giant GX who loved heights made it look like child's play. Truly he was in his element here. The exercise and the thrill of the climb made him feel powerfully alive. At first, the landslide had been an irritation because it had forced he and his brothers to abandon their bus ride. But now he was enjoying himself so much that he was actually glad it had happened. Pausing for breath, he turned and looked down at his brothers, who were still standing at the base of the landslide. He had climbed well beyond the circle of light. His face was obscured, but his silver hair and white teeth shone brightly in the darkness. "What are you waiting for?" he called out. "The elevator," Mohawk replied. He hated standing on anything higher than a kitchen table, and the prospect of climbing a wall of mud didn't bear thinking about. "Can you send it down when you get to the top?" he added. "Come on, it's a piece of cake," Flat Top yelled. "That's easy for you to say," replied Mohawk. "You've always loved this sort of thing. "Do you want me to come and get you?" asked Flat Top. "I didn't say that, I just need a few moments to prepare myself," Mohawk called back. "Okay," replied Flat Top. "What about you, Mane?" Mane's response was to give his brother an encouraging pat on the back and then clamber up the side of the landslide. Mohawk stared up the sheer wall of mud and debris and wondered what had possessed his masters in North Korea to send him, a man who was absolutely terrified of heights, to the country with the highest mountains in the world. There was definitely something very wrong about this whole mission. Taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, he cursed all tall things and followed his brothers up the side of the landslide. On the mountain road, the same Nepalese man who had witnessed Abby and Zaw scale the landslide saw 3 more figures go up and over the top in quick succession. Rubbing his eyes in disbelief, he stared again and could have sworn the last of them was a bear of a man with a resplendent silver mohawk. Unbelievable, he was about to bring this new discovery to his companion's attention when common sense prevailed, and taking the cigarette from his lips, he sniffed at it suspiciously, wondering if someone had replaced his usual brand with something far stronger. "You going to say something?" his friend asked. "No, nothing," he muttered, flicking the unused length of the cigarette into the darkness. It took the 3 GX super soldiers twice as long to cross the top of the landslide as the Yetis, but that was still a respectable effort. Only Mohawk paused at the far side to look down at the mountain road, during which time he loudly swallowed the large lump in his throat and fought off a bout of gut-gripping vertigo. He climbed down without once looking down, which was foolhardy and dangerous, but that was par for the course for Mohawk when it came to climbing. He knew he had hit the ground when his size 20 boots crunched down on the road. The descent had taken him 2 minutes, 2 of the longest minutes in his short, genetically engineered life. "Not too bad for a guy who's afraid of heights," said Mane, shining the torch at Mohawk. "Not too bad yourself for a guy who's afraid of the dark," answered Mohawk. Flat Top ran his gaze along the line of vehicles trapped in front of the landslide. One of these must be thinking about turning around and heading back to Shabrubesi. "Either of you guys know how to thumb a ride in Nepal?" But Mane wasn't paying attention. He was watching the men who were digging at the edge of the landslide. With a concerned frown on his face, he turned to Mohawk and said, "I think there might be a vehicle trapped under the landslide." Mohawk looked over at the men. "What makes you think that?" he asked. "Why else would those men be digging?" Mane replied. Flat Top disinterestedly glanced over at the little men with the shovels. "Maybe they just want to clean up the landslide," he suggested. "But surely they can see that it's going to take forever using only shovels," Mane said. Flat Top shook his head. "So they've got a lot of heart," he grunted. "I respect 'em for it, but the landslide is not our problem. So forget about it and start looking for a ride to Shabrubesi." Mane started forward but then hesitated, and his gaze was drawn back to the toiling men. Flat Top saw him pause and exclaimed, "Look, there's no way a vehicle could get trapped under here. Anything caught in the path of the landslide would have been swept over the edge of the cliff." "Yeah, but," Mane said, "if that's true, why are those men digging?" Flat Top spat, cursed angrily, and said, "How should I know? Maybe they're stupid. The point is, it's not our problem. We've got our orders, and they don't include digging through landslides or wasting time talking about it. This whole mess of mud and trees seems pretty unstable, and I don't want to be around it when it goes. So let's get moving." With those parting words, Flat Top turned and headed for the line of cars. Mane watched him go in silence, then looked back at the men. Part of him wanted to take Flat Top's advice, but an undefinable something tugged at his conscience. His training with the North Korean military had dissolved his sense of right and wrong, but now, as he looked at the men digging at the landslide, he felt like he should do something. He felt like he should help. He knew it was none of his business, but that didn't matter. If there were people in trouble, he might be able to save them. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. Yes, it was the right thing to do. Little by little, bit by bit, Mane's rigid training was being broken down to reveal his true personality. Leaving Mohawk, he hurried along the base of the landslide towards the men. When he reached them, he towered over them and they raised their shovels fearfully. Pocketing his torch and displaying his empty hands to show he meant them no harm, he tried communicating in English, but they just stared uncomprehendingly. There was no point switching to North Korean, so instead, using hand gestures, he did his best to convey that he wanted to know why they were digging. A flurry of gestures followed, and pretty soon Maine got the message. Thanking them, he jogged back to Mohawk and Flattop, who was waiting a few car lengths away. They say there's a bus trapped under the landslide, Maine called out to Flattop. How do you know? You don't speak Nepalese, Flattop said. Maine ignored the silly retort and replied, we should help them dig the bus out. Are you crazy? Flattop roared, that might take all night. Besides, helping complete strangers is not part of our mission objective, so I say we forget about the bus and keep moving. Maine crossed his huge arms. And I say we stay and help those people trapped under the landslide, he yelled. They're probably already dead anyway, roared Flattop. Do you really want to dig all night only to find out you couldn't have saved them? At least I'll know I tried, Maine howled angrily. Exasperated, Flattop started back. Mohawk, what do you think we should do? He asked. Mohawk held up his hands in mock submission. Hey, I'm staying right out of this, he answered. This is between you and Maine, but you must have an opinion, Flattop pressed. That's right, Maine said, turning to Mohawk. We're a team, we make decisions as a team, and we want to know what you think. Well, Mohawk began slowly. His North Korean military training had ill-equipped him to solve moral conundrums. If there is a bus under this huge pile of mud, he began, it's gonna take a heck of a long time to dig it out, and I don't think our masters in North Korea would be pleased with us wasting so much time. Flattop punched the air exultantly. My thoughts exactly, he yelled. On the other hand, Mohawk continued, it doesn't seem right leaving some people trapped under a landslide. Seems kind of cruel. I mean, if we can help them, maybe we should. Flattop's victorious grin disappeared. Doesn't seem right, he shot back. Whoever said this mission was about doing the right thing, this mission was only ever about one thing. Following our orders to bring that yeti tooth back to North Korea. That's what I've been trying to explain to you, Maine exclaimed. This mission is about more than just following orders, don't you feel it? Ever since I got off the plane in Kathmandu, I've felt free to think about what I want to think about, free to do what I want to do, free to have my own opinions. Standing next to a landslide in the middle of Nepal seemed like a strange place to have this argument, but Maine didn't care. In the corner of his eye, he saw Mohawk nodding in agreement with everything he had said. Maine waited a moment to see if Flattop said anything, then added, and free to make my own choices. Flattop glared at his brother doubtfully. We're not free, Maine, he growled. We're the property of the North Korean military that trains us and feeds us. I can't believe you've forgotten that. I haven't forgotten it, I've just realized it's a lie, replied Maine. I haven't forgotten my mission objective either, but right now I am making a choice to help the people trapped under this landslide. Not because it's part of my mission, but because it's the right thing to do. I'm with you, Maine, said Mohawk. Maine nodded and looked back at Flattop. What about you? You can either stand around complaining or help us. Flattop briefly stared up at the night sky as if asking for advice from above, and then angrily kicked his boot into the mountain road, sending a shower of dust and gravel in Maine's direction. I think this is a stupid idea, growled Flattop, but whatever we do as a team, so let's dig this bus out and then get on with the mission. Maine didn't need Flattop's permission to start digging, but he was glad he had his approval. Judging by the size of the landslide, the process of excavating the bus would take a considerable period of time, and Maine could use all the help he could get. The giant GXs dropped their rucksacks on the side of the road and approached the men who continued to dig at the landslide. Those men had heard the silver-haired giants arguing about something, but as the matter didn't concern them, and they couldn't understand the giants' language, they had ignored the strange foreigners and doggedly continued with their work. Now all three giants stood silently before them with determined expressions on their oddly gorilla-like faces. Maine rolled his sleeves up, revealing a thick covering of silver hair on his forearms. The Nepalese men wordlessly handed over their shovels and stood back to watch what happened next. They had been struggling with the landslide for the last hour and had encountered a number of tree trunks and boulders that simply could not be excavated without heavy equipment. The landslide was, as far as they were concerned, an immovable object, which was bad news for the people trapped beneath it. What they needed was divine intervention. What they got were 3 GX super soldiers. From a purely earth-moving perspective, there wasn't a lot of difference. Flattop looked down at the puny shovel in his enormous hands, then cast it aside. It was about as suitable for the task as a toothpick. After agreeing on a plan of action, the GXs set to work extracting the uppermost tree trunks and boulders from the side of the landslide. Their teamwork was impeccable. Each man had an unconscious sense of where his efforts would be most valuable. They were 3 individuals who worked as if they were controlled by one mind. Had their masters in North Korea witnessed their Herculean efforts, they might have seriously reconsidered their decision to liquidate the GXs at the conclusion of the mission. Flattop and Maine labored tirelessly from the top of the landslide, extracting huge tree trunks and pitching them down to Mohawk, who, owing to his terrible fear of heights, was more than happy to work on the ground, dragging the debris a safe distance away. An hour later, the GX's plan was clear. After identifying the part of the landslide most likely to contain the trapped bus, they first removed all the tree trunks and boulders from that area, starting at the top of the landslide and working their way back down to the mountain road. Following the removal of the heavy debris, it would just be a matter of digging through meters and meters of mud and dirt to reveal the buried bus. It was inevitable that they would succeed in this part of the endeavor. Whether or not they could get there in time to save the passengers was less certain. Another hour passed. A small crowd had gathered to watch the GXs slowly deconstruct part of the landslide. There were audible gasps whenever one of the giants lifted a boulder or tree trunk that was plainly more than any ordinary human could possibly carry. Nobody had any idea who these silver-haired strangers were, but as the trench being plowed into the side of the landslide continued to deepen, there was no doubt that the odds of survival for the people trapped under the landslide were on the rise. It was like watching an unstoppable force pitted against an immovable object, and the unstoppable force was winning. When the last of the boulders had been removed from the narrow area of the landslide leading to the trapped bus, Flattop dropped to the road to help drag the rocks out of the way. Wrapping his huge arms around one craggy boulder, he hefted it off the ground and staggered towards the side of the road. The crowd murmured in awe, and Flattop, momentarily distracted by his newfound celebrity, stumbled and dropped the boulder on the bonnet of a nearby car, crushing it like aluminium foil. "Oops," Flattop said to the man sitting nervously in the driver's seat. "Sorry about that." When the characteristically selfish GX was standing beside Maine, he added, with a wry grin, "Lucky that car was there, or I would have dropped that rock on my foot." They stood back and examined their handiwork. Now that the area of the landslide they were working on was free of heavy debris, they were clear to start digging into the mud and dirt. Taking up the tiny shovels, they advanced on the landslide and began to work. But a few minutes later, Flattop threw his shovel away. "That thing's useless," he declared. "What I need is something bigger." He looked around thoughtfully, and his gaze settled on the car he accidentally crushed with the boulder. Then he grinned from ear to ear and said, "That's just what I'm looking for." The hapless Nepalese man was still sitting in the driver's seat when Flattop ripped one door off the car. Holding it up with both huge hands, he made digging motions in the air using the door to show his brothers what he had in mind. After ripping two more doors off the car, he bent down to address the shocked man cowering in the driver's seat. "I'm sorry about the boulder and I'm sorry about these doors, but all of this is for the good of humanity. Just ask that man over there," he said, nodding his head in Maine's direction. "He'll tell you." Flattop handed the new shovels to his brothers. Maine accepted his and asked, "Did you really have to rip the doors off that poor man's car?" Flattop gave him a blank look. "Oh, so now you want to save the cars as well as the passengers on the bus," he replied sarcastically. "Never mind," Maine muttered. He realized that Flattop was terrorizing the locals just to get back at him, but there was nothing he could do about it now. Taking a firm grip on the car door, he began shoveling dirt out of the deepening trench as quickly as he could. His brothers matched him stroke for stroke, and after a while, Maine had to admit that the work was progressing much faster using the new GX-sized shovels. Flattop's methods could be unrefined, but he knew how to get the job done. That was why he was such a good soldier. The night wore on, but the GXs never tired and their arms never stopped digging. Often the only noises on that mountain road were the grunts from the trio as they worked, and the soft frump 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 of shovelfuls of dirt slapping onto the road after being flung from the landslide. On several occasions, they had to remove more tree trunks and boulders in order to continue digging deeper. Some of the vehicles turned back to Shabberbessy, and as their rear lights shrank into the distance, Flattop paused and watched them go. He estimated that he and his brothers had been digging for almost 5 hours now, 5 wasted hours as far as he was concerned. He always made sure Maine saw his dark expression before he resumed digging. The trench into the side of the landslide began to look more like a tunnel leading from the darkness of the night to the black center of the landslide. Flattop, who was anti-small places, mopped at the nervous sweat that began to stream down his temples. This was yet another reason why Maine's plan to save the trapped bus was inconvenient and dumb. Apart from the fact that it was completely contrary to their orders from North Korea, It required him to squeeze his claustrophobic body into a place it didn't want to go. The work continued, and the trench in the side of the landslide deepened. The GXs were like Moses parting the Red Sea, except they were doing it with a lot more hard yakka and without God's help. Of course, the GXs had never heard of God, and given their status as genetically engineered prototype organisms, it was likely that God had never heard of them. Soon Flattop calculated the tunnel to be about 15 meters deep. That meant they were at least at the center of the landslide, and possibly halfway to the other side. Worryingly, there was still no sign of the bus that was allegedly trapped under the mud he had been digging at for the last 5 hours. 5 hours of his life that he would never get back. Eventually, he propped the battered car door on the ground and rested his hands on top. "Maine, are you thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. In fact, Maine was thinking what Flattop was thinking, he just didn't want to admit it. About an hour ago, it had occurred to him that if there really was a bus trapped under the landslide, they should have hit it by now. He put his car door down, took the torch from his jaws, and shone it at his brother. Flattop's silver hair was dusted with a light covering of brown dirt, and the black mud smeared across his face seemed to emphasize the jungle gorilla in his features. Maine was pretty sure his brother was spoiling for another argument, and he was right. "Well," Flattop growled, his silver eyebrows knitted together angrily. "Well, what?" asked Maine. "Shouldn't we have found the bus by now?" Flattop snapped. "This is, after all, exactly where the Nepalese men said it is, right? Somewhere round here." "Yes," Maine said carefully. "Somewhere round here," Flattop roared. "How much of this damn landslide do we have to dig through before you come to your senses?" "I'm not prepared to give up just yet," Maine retorted. "And I'm not prepared to dig all the way back to Kathmandu just because you think some people in a bus might need our help," Flattop yelled. A rivulet of sweat trickled down his cheek, leaving a streak of clean skin through the black mud. "Face it, Maine," Flattop said. "There's no bus here and we've just wasted half the night digging for nothing." "No, I don't believe it," Maine replied vehemently. "They said the bus was here and they said they were sure. How do you know?" "You don't speak their language," Flattop yelled. "They look sure," Maine snapped back. "Well, now we've dug this hole and we're sure there is no bus here," said Flattop. "So I say we ditch this stupid idea and get going to Shabrubesi." But Maine had turned his back on his brother and started shoveling dirt again. "No," he yelled over his shoulder. "Just another few meters." Before Maine could react, Flattop seized the battered car door from his hands and flung it out of the tunnel like a frisbee. It skated along the mountain road like a flat stone skipping across a pond, sailed over the precipice at the edge of the road, and eventually crashed through the undergrowth in the valley below. Maine kept his temper in check. "I liked that car door," he said through gritted teeth. "So you're just gonna have to tear yourself another one," Flattop growled, his jaw jutting forward aggressively. "You know I don't want to do that," Maine replied. "What makes you think I care what you want?" Flattop said. In the heat of the moment, neither of them noticed that Mohawk had disappeared. Flattop took a step towards Maine and raised a clenched fist when Mohawk materialized beside him, carrying 3 of the puny shovels that the Nepalese men had been using earlier in the night. Flattop's eyes flicked down to the shovel that was offered to him. Snatching it, he glared at Maine and pounded the steel shovel head against his open palm with a slow, threatening rhythm. "Yeah, this is what I need to get the message across," he growled. "Actually, that's not what I had in mind," Mohawk replied. The business end of each shovel was attached to a wooden handle like a broom handle about 4 feet long, which was, in effect, a blunt spear. Selecting a spot at chest height, Mohawk plunged the shovel into the dirt wall, handle first, and kept pushing until the handle was buried right up to the steel shovel head. With the strength of a GX behind it, the wooden handle penetrated the mud like a hot knife through butter. The shovel handle clearly encountered no resistance in the mud, meaning the bus, if there was one, was not located within 4 feet of that side of the tunnel. Mohawk pulled the shovel handle out of the mud wall, walked down the tunnel, and then stabbed the handle in. Again, it went all the way up to the hilt without hitting anything. "That's 2 strikes against you," Flattop said, glancing at Maine. "One more and you're out, brother." Maine picked up another shovel and drove its handle into the mud on the other side of the tunnel. It slid straight into the wall and then struck something hard. The shovel reverberated in Maine's hands. "Home run, brother," he replied with a knowing look on his face. Flattop's gloating expression turned to doubt. "That's a rock," he muttered. "Let's see," Maine replied. He moved further down the tunnel and stabbed the shovel handle in. Once again it went most of the way into the wall and then struck something unyielding. "You think that's another rock?" he asked. Flattop shrugged his huge shoulders. "It's possible," he said. "We haven't pulled them all out of this landslide." further down the tunnel and the same result. If it is a rock, it's a bus-sized rock. I say we start digging towards it, Maine said. Flattop had no argument in reply. He started for the tunnel mouth and asked over his shoulder, "What color car door do you want?" "Just make it a big one," Maine laughed. By the time Flattop returned, Maine and Mohawk had established the dimensions of the object that was inside the landslide. Maine was sure it was the bus, about 10 meters long and 4 meters high, lying parallel to the tunnel. After 2 final probing stabs with the shovel handle to locate the bus's end, Maine cast it aside and determinedly took up the car door.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.